Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to take a look at this model here. This is the Bflight 210. Now this one has come from GearBest. I'll put a link in the description if you want to have a look at it. But the reason I've got this in is that it is a proper quadcopter. But it's a proper quadcopter that appears to cost less than £110. Now, quite a few people have been in touch recently asking about kits that they can buy to try and build a quadcopter relatively cheaply. And most of the kits that I've been looking at, or most of the parts that I would normally put together, would cost about the same as this quadcopter as well. So I'm interested in getting this one in and having a go with it just to see what it's like, because the last quad that was this kind of size was actually the Coppice one from Hollowbro, and that was about 3 times the cost. It's an amazing model, but can a model that costs a third of something like the Coppice one still provide a really good platform to getting into FPV and FPV racing? So first of all, let me just show you how this comes, because initially when I started looking at this quadcopter, I was very impressed indeed. And then I started to notice a couple of things, but don't worry, it's actually a really good model. It's just that this is definitely built to a price point. So when you open the box, the first thing you'll notice are the props that are included. You get 2 sets. In mine, one of the sets was black and the other one was a set of clear. Both of them are complete sets, so if you're using all of the clear ones and then you break one, then unfortunately you're going to have to use the black and vice versa. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Delprop Cyclones at the moment. You get a bag of bits that has a couple of battery straps. It also has an adapter if you want to use a different type of FPV antenna. The one on it's a little linear one, a little bit of heat shrink, and then you get the model itself. Now as it arrived, it's covered in the 2 bags for protection, but that's all there is. Underneath that is the manual, so there's no clever inserts, there's no kind of reinforcing for the shipping. It's pretty much just a quad and the basic bits and pieces along with it as well. Now, first impressions on the quad are very good when you take it out of the box. The carbon fibre looks nice, the frame's reasonably finished, the soldering's actually pretty good as well. We have a 4-in-1 ESC at the bottom, and we have a flight controller at the top, and we have, I think it looks like a clone FR Sky receiver. The wires to the motors are covered in colourful braiding for protection, and then we have kind of generic 22R5 2300 motors. Now these motors are similar ones to the ones I used recently. They're only about £6 or £7 a piece, but they actually perform pretty well for the money. The antenna that's installed by default is the linear antenna. I'm going to take that off and replace it in a sec. I'm going to replace it with this cable that actually comes in the box. Let me just see if I can fish this one out. Initially I thought this was broken, but then I realised that all you do is you just screw the pin in here. So unfortunately this is going to be an RP SMA style connector. Most of my stuff is the other way around, because I have a lot of Fat Shark and Immersion RC stuff from back in the day, but there's even a hole at the top here for this to go in, and by using a little bit of brute force you can pop out the connector on the VTX module that's at the top of this stack, and once this is in, then you can put an RP SMA style antenna in the hole. Now, plugging it into Betaflight, just to show you what I found, it was pretty unconfigured. Went through all the standard setups. I've actually created a little video I'll put a link to here, which shows in much more detail what I go through to set up all of the bind and fly quadcopters that I do. It's pretty much the same as exactly what I'd do if I had built one myself. But I know lots of people are going to be getting these kind of models over Christmas time, and just wanted to make sure that for those of you that have, you have kind of somewhere to go to have a look. Everything looks okay. The port setup is pretty standard. It's S-Bus by default. The motor stop is turned on and D-Shot 600 is selected, so that's nice. We're actually using those ESCs that are on this model at a reasonable speed. Only the accelerometers are enabled. And then interestingly, as you go to the bottom, there's lots of things turned on that shouldn't be. Things like the LED strip, it doesn't have one of them. It does have an SD card on the flight controller, so you could keep that on for logging. And on-screen display is turned on as well because it has one of those. In the modes tab, no modes was set up at all, so I had to go through and configure everything. So I set up an arming switch, set up a switch for the flight modes, and set up a beeper switch as well. The nice thing about this, it doesn't have LEDs sadly, but it does have a beeper installed in the little flight stack in the middle, which is very handy if it comes down. It's a reasonably loud one as well, which will help you find this if you crash in longer grass. Now, I had a couple of problems setting this up. Let me just give you a couple of tips when I was actually putting this together, because it wasn't all plain sailing. The first tip I give you is take that linear antenna off. Unless you're going to use something like one of the Menace RC patches, it isn't the best idea. I would recommend, if you're going to get one of these, invest in an RP SMA style antenna. A good circular polarized antenna or pagoda style antenna will give you a far better experience. I had issues with the receiver in this thing. Now, even though I was binding the receiver to the radio, and I think this receiver is a clone FR Sky unit rather than a real receiver, I couldn't see any of the signals coming through in the receiver tab. Now, what I had to do to get that working was undo the little white cable that goes from the flight controller up into the VTX. Now, the idea with that is that's supposed to send the S-bus signal to the VTX, and then you can use channel 6 or auxiliary 2 on your radio to then change the channels up or down. Personally, I think that's a blooming terrible idea anyway. I know other pilots that have had these things that when the failsafe has happened on the receiver, so that's kind of a bit of a warning that be careful with the range with these cheap and cheerful receivers in this thing. Failsafes, it's also changing the video channel, and that of course means that you can't see what's going on. The other thing is there are no witness holes for you to see what the channel and band are that you have got everything set to. You can change it by pressing a little button on the VTX, which is easy, it's pretty standard stuff. Again, it's not showing you alphanumerically what band and channel you're using, so it has this little set of lights. Now, unfortunately, by default, the top plate doesn't have any witness holes so you can see those lights, so I took a bit of a Dremel and made a little bit of a hole so you could actually see them, and that made it a lot easier. And it also meant my S-bus was working, and I just changed the channel using the button on the VTX, which is the top of the stack anyway. I am a little bit concerned about the mini receiver. It seems to be working just flying in kind of park style conditions, but I definitely wouldn't push any range. If you're going to push any range at all, I would probably invest in a proper FR Sky or Fly Sky or whatever system that you're using. Get a real proper antenna and wire it in for S-bus and use that instead. The little stubby antenna that comes on this thing is going to very quickly get into trouble. You want it well clear of all of the carbon fibre and other gubbins in the model. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's actually been working fine here, but do be careful about where you route the antenna by default to make sure that as much of that antenna is free to receive the signal from your radio. The other tip for me is balance the props. The counterclockwise ones, I think it was, were particularly bad, very out of balance. The clockwise ones were fine, but I ended up having to put quite a bit of tape on a couple of the props here. There is no point in spending hours and hours with all the anti-vibration stuff and LPF filters and all that gubbins with notch filters in Betaflight on the flight controller if you're not first of all balancing your props. So I'd recommend always balance your props, and that gets rid of a vast majority of the vibration that you'll tend to come across on a model. I would unselect motor stop. Be aware of that in the Betaflight settings we've just had a look at. That confused the heck out of me. I didn't spot it initially when I was doing the setup. So when I armed the board, I'm normally used to all of the motors spinning around, and they weren't until I increased the throttle slightly, and that really blew my mind a little bit. It's been a long time since I've had a Betaflight setup where the motor stop has been enabled, particularly when you're using something like D-Shot. And the last thing I'd say is the angle by default on mine for the camera was very shallow. It's easy to sort that out. A couple of little Phillips screws in the side and you can tilt it up. Now there is a small joystick on the back of the camera that you can use to access the on-screen display. I found that I haven't really needed it. All the footage I'm going to show you here for flying around was actually using all the defaults that the machine came with. Okay, so now we've done that, as with any model, it's ready to go out and do a bit of test flying. The nice one about this is when you power the flight controller, it does power the receiver, so you can go through the majority of the setup without having to plug the flight battery in. First time you're going to plug a flight battery in, I'd recommend use a smoke stopper, or just get your voltmeter out, pop it across the two terminals in the XT60 connector at the back, set it onto resistance or ohm setting, and just make sure the reading isn't zero. That way you'll know that whoever built this thing hasn't cut any corners. There's no QC stickers on here, there's nothing to say that this thing has actually ever been flown, and I can't see any of that detail in the flight controller, and the fact it has no mode selected at all says to me that it's probably never been spun up. So what's it like to fly? Surprisingly good is the answer. Now they have thought an awful lot about the different pieces on this model here. This flight here is with a little 4S 1800 mAh pack, and I'm just having a zoom around, and hopefully you'll see a couple of things. First of all, how lovely and smooth it is, and secondly of all, how well the camera is coping. The camera in this thing is no brand at all, so I was really dubious about what the performance was going to be, but even in the very bright light conditions that we've got, this very bright sunny morning here, it's kind of early winter in the UK, it's performing fantastically well. The on-screen display is working fine. It actually has voltage sensing. The current sensor seems to be working too. It is actually really good fun and flying really smoothly. Now I was being a little bit careful here flying around. I just didn't want to push it out of the range of that receiver or that little stubby antenna, but the way this little guy is performing, I'm very tempted to put a real FrSky receiver on this, do a little bit of routing of the antennas so they're nice and clear of the chassis, because this for the money is really good. So in summary, what do I think? Well, I really like the fact that this thing is only about £110. You get lots of things in the box that you need. You don't get a lot of things that you don't need. This is definitely built for a certain price, but we'll come on to that in a second. The Omnibus F3 flight controller is a great flight controller. I've used loads of them in different things, both quads and fixed wing. It's a pretty standard thing now. F4 would have been nice, but you know what? At this price point and the way it flies, I don't really care. The modular arms on the frame are nice touches. At the moment, I can't see if it's easy to get spares if you break something. If any of you have had one of these and know where you can get the spares for it, if you could post a link, that would help everybody who now owns the model. And this, I think, is now the quadcopter that I'll probably go to if somebody's looking for this kind of 210mm 250 style sized quad that actually behaves, performs and has all of the basic bits. Because that brings me on to the last little bit. It is a very good camera, but it's a no-name camera. It has okay motors, they're not super duper motors. It has a nice little cheap receiver. There's no action camera mount for the top, so the kind of things that you tend to get with more expensive quads are not in the box. The all-in-one ESCs seem to perform really well. I actually don't have any particular axe to grind about all-in-one ESCs when they perform this nicely. They're not getting particularly hot, and the fact they're running D-Shot 600 is nice. But it would have been nice to have a couple of the extra little home comforts inside the box for an extra £1 or so. There's no foam pad, so I've cut one and popped one at the bottom of my model. I don't want my battery rubbing against the heads of the screws as I fly around. There is a battery, of course, so you are going to have to invest in one of those, so don't forget to add that onto the price of the quad. The battery strap that comes with the model is absolutely pants. It's completely terrible. I've replaced mine with another one that actually grabs onto the battery, and with that and a bit of foam, I'm quite confident that the battery isn't going to get ejected every time I crash. And the last thing is there aren't any spares at all, apart from a spare battery strap, which again I'm not a big fan of. The battery strap that comes with it is terrible. Now that sounds like I've been really nitpicky, and if this was a model that was 150, 160 quid, then you know what, I'd probably be saying that it's not good enough. The fact that it's at the price point that it is and it flies so well, albeit there's a couple of extra little wrinkles that you might have to do to set it up, but I think if you're looking for an entry-level machine that does what it says on the tin and flies really well and provides a platform that you could then subsequently upgrade things like the camera, the receiver, maybe upgrade the motors, change the props out and get into the tinkering side of the hobby, this is a great platform. Or if you just want to get a quad that kind of going to fly really well and not break the bank, then this is a really good choice too. So again, I'll put links in the description so you can go and have a look at this. But if you are looking for something for Christmas in this kind of range and you already have a radio and a nice receiver that will talk S-Bus and you have a battery knocking about as well, you could do an awful lot worse than get one of these. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and particularly for watching right to the very end. We try and release a video on Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes we'll release 1 or 2 extra ones in a week as well. All of the videos on the channel are organised into easy to use playlists, so do have a look in there, because if you're interested in a subject, we organise all the videos on that subject so you can find them easily all together in one place. If you like what we're doing, then please like and subscribe and tell others about the channel so they can come and join as well. We're available in all of the usual social media places, particularly in places like Instagram, Twitter, and we also share all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse.